Just Transition Summit, so named today. So now I'm so excited to introduce our second keynote, but first, can we all take a couple of breaths in, just relax a little bit, take a breath in, and out. Shake it out. You want to move around a little bit. I'm going to read Gopal's introduction, and then he's going to share his wisdom with all of us. So, Gopal Dayaneni has been involved in working for social, economic, environmental, and racial justice through organizing and campaigning, teaching, writing, speaking, and direct action since the late 1980s. He is the co-founder of Movement Generation, Justice and Ecology Project, which inspires and engages in transformative action towards the liberation and restoration of land, labor, and culture. Movement Generation is rooted in vibrant social movements led by low-income communities and communities of color committed to a just transition away from profit and pollution towards healthy, resilient, and life-affirming local economies. Movement Generation is a founding member of the Climate Justice Alliance. Gopal has served on the staff collective and is now a member of the planning committee and board. Just so you all know, Movement Generation came up with the 2 circles and the transition from one circle to the other, where there's a canvas replica of that with Alaskanized ideas outside if you want to go check that out and add your ideas afterwards, not right now. Currently, Gopal supports movement building through his work with organizations including the Climate Justice Alliance, ETC Group, the Center for Story-Based Strategy, and People's Solar Energy Fund. He's also a fellow with the Center for Economic Democracy. Gopal teaches ecological systems thinking in the Masters of Arts in Urban Sustainability program and climate justice and environmental justice in the undergraduate program at Antioch University in Los Angeles. Gopal also teaches race, activism, and climate justice and Asian Americans and environmental justice at San Francisco State University in the Race and Resistance Studies and Asian American Studies departments. Gopal was an elementary and early childhood educator, working formerly as a teacher and also as the co-director of the Tenderloin Child Care Center, a community-based child care center supporting children and families forced into homelessness. He has worked in teacher education and education organizing in the US and in India. Most importantly, Gopal is the parent of 2 amazing rabble-rousers. He lives in Cochin or Oakland in an intentional, multi-generational social justice community of 9 adults and a squabble of youth. Please welcome Gopal.
I really hope the intro didn't come out of my time. Just kidding. Didn't expect it to be so long. Hello, my name is Gopal Dayaneni. I use he, him pronouns. I'm really honored and humbled to be here. I am coming from Cochin, unceded Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone territories. I live along the Temescal Creek drainage, which is mostly culverted and channelized, but still runs free both under and occasionally above ground. It is also the birthplace of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, known as Oakland, California. And I live in an intentional community with much other folks. My kids were born and raised in it. My family comes from southeast India along the Krishna River, which drains into the Bay of Bengal. As far back as our memories go, on both the sides of my parents' families, we are from from the Krishna River, and we come from peasant agricultural people. Of course, a lot of things changed with the Industrial Revolution and industrial agriculture and colonization and all those things. I was born in Norway, an accident of the colonial globalized project. And I just want to start by just saying I'm incredibly humbled in every respect to be here. I mean, I'm humbled by the view. I am humbled by all of the folks who are here. I have to go after Jose, and really just humbled by the incredible projects and work that everybody is doing, and just what we've been hearing about in Alaska and across, across this really vast region, and with incredible diversity, and that diversity reflected in the ways in which people are organizing across their communities. So, yeah, I feel, I was mentioning earlier, I have a little imposter syndrome. I'm also not keeping track of my time very well. Oh, sorry, there's a big sound behind me. Before I get into my thoughts, I wanted to start by just reminding us that ideas don't come from individuals. Like, the individual is a lie. It's a great lie. I am fond of pointing out that I only have a name because I am not alone. If I was alone, I wouldn't need a name. My name is not mine. It is a way I can be in community with others. And ideas are actually an expression of life's diversity and exuberance. It is a consequence of symbiosis. Like, even if you just think the ideas are coming from quote unquote you wouldn't have them if you didn't have microbial life in your gut, you know? But even that, like, ideas are born out of our relationships. And so I just want to name that, like, I really appreciated yesterday when there was talk of, none of this is new, and none of it is new, and there hasn't been a new thought in thousands of years. And all of our ideas and thoughts are really a function of building a really important and profound community of practice. And I want to speak to that quite a bit in my time. So I just want to say that. So just because my lips are moving does not mean these are in any way ideas that I would claim. I often refer to the little Just Transition book that we have at Movement Generations. I often say, I was the primate at the keyboard, because all I had to do is, put down collective wisdom together, and inspired by so much other work. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of emphasis on breathing and healing and breath, and so I just wanted to start there because, Just Transition is in some ways something we aspire to breathe towards. And we look to each other for inspiration to breathe into. And that is because we are all part of a grand conspiracy to breathe together. We are conspiring with every breath, with all life that ever has been and ever will be. We are the respiratory system of the planet, along with all of the rest of life, which we are a part of. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2, and the plants and trees breathe in that CO2 and breathe out oxygen. We are the respiratory system of this grand living thing that we call Earth, or our mother. And so I just wanted to remind us and to celebrate the grand conspiracy and all the little conspiracies that we are engaged with every day. Because that, I think, is the most healing thing. I'm fond of telling my students, there's absolutely nothing you can do, there's no action that you can take to have any impact on the scale, pace, and implications of the ecological crisis or the crisis of inequity that caused it. But there is absolutely nothing that you cannot do if you get organized with other folks. It is always and only ever going to be about organizing. And so what this experience has been for me is like a window into the incredible organizing that folks are doing across this land and region. Okay. I really wanted to appreciate the history, the legacy of Just Transition that Jose emphasized, and its origins in work and workers, and the organizing of workers and communities together. Because ultimately, the first rule of ecological restoration is the restoration of our labor back into right relationship with living systems. and each other, because we are alive. I often jokingly say, what's your favorite animal? And then I point out that nobody ever says people. As if we're not. Or if I say, all wealth is generated through the work of the living world, somebody, usually like a hardcore leftist, will raise their hand and say, what about human labor? And I'll be like, wait, you didn't hear that in the work of the living world? You didn't hear yourself in the work of the living world? I don't really see a value in distinguishing between the microbial life in the soil and the labor of the human. You know, we all take energy from the sun, we convert it into power to do work. We're no different than dung beetles pushing shit up a hill. So for me, that important question of what is our relationship to our work, and when I say work, I mean it in the deepest sense. We take energy from the sun, we convert it into power to do work. Let's not waste our time drawing a distinction between the beating of a heart and the hugging of a child and the singing of a song and the building of a building and the planting of a seed. It is all work. When we start to say that some work is productive and some work is reproductive and some work is valuable and some work is not valuable, we go down the long, deep, dangerous road of separating ourselves from all that is around us, including each other. So that is really the starting point for how we think about just transition and movement generation. Built on that profound wisdom of recognizing the role of work and workers and their place in helping us rethink and reimagine our relationship to the economy. And it has a deep history. Yesterday on the Black to Just Transition panel, folks talked about how this is nothing new, and that is absolutely correct. This is nothing new. It is inspired by, of course, the work that came before, social movements from around the world, concepts like buen vivir, ecological swaraj, the Chipko movement in India of Adivasi indigenous women defending their forests, whose slogan is, ecology is permanent economy. Ecology, knowledge of home, is permanent economy, care of home. And so it is true that there's nothing new. And it is also true that it might be helpful for us in this time to find a way to talk about all the amazing work that we are all doing in all these different places all the time together. To be able to tell a story that amplifies our shared work. Because story is a deep medicine. As my friends Raj Patel and Rupa Maria, who just put out a book called Inflamed, write about. This notion of story as deep medicine, as deep healing. And we as a social movement who are seeking to live into the world we know we all need and deserve, and to, as has been the theme, remember our way forward, we need the stories to help guide us and remind us of that journey. I want to share, I keep looking at you because I'm worried about time. I want to share how we talk about the strategic principles of just transition, because I think that might be a helpful way to start moving into some concrete examples of things I've seen in other places. And then talk a little bit about what I see as some of the challenging things that come up for us that we need to grapple with, and how we've been thinking about them at Movement Generation. So we have 4 kind of core principles of just transition, a way of capturing the idea of, stop the bad, build the good, move the money, change the story. There's a bunch more there, that whole list. We tried to find a way of articulating it. And so I want to share those 4 principles. The first principle is what the hands do, the heart learns. What the hands do, the heart learns. And this is, again, back to that idea that the first rule of ecological restoration is the restoration of our labor. If all we do is fight against what we don't want, we will learn to love the fight. And we will have nothing left for our vision but longing, and longing isn't good enough. We must actually organize ourselves in a different way, not to simply make demands of existing structures of power, not to simply decry what we don't like, but to actually, together, in community, organize ourselves to directly meet our needs. That is why food sovereignty, energy democracy, transformative justice, cooperative housing, community clinics, community-based healing, traditional foods as medicine. That is why these things all matter, because this is not us demanding that somebody else do something for us. This is our communities meeting our needs. The second principle is if it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. If it is the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. And that is not simply a call to direct action, although it is a call to direct action, because I would like to remind people that the law does not determine what is right and what is wrong. The law determines what is legal and what is illegal. Enslavement was wrong, and everybody knew it, and it was absolutely legal. Crossing an arbitrary border imposed by colonial powers in order to ensure that your family has the best chance of creating a home and surviving is illegal, and it is absolutely the right thing to do because all living things do it. Do not allow the existing structure of law to constrain your revolutionary imagination. It is actually the rebellion against those laws that is the basis of revolution. Revolution is not about the struggle for power. Revolution is when a community of people are organized enough to assert rights that they can contest the legitimacy of existing authority. And the only way to assert rights is to exercise them. Raise your hand if you believe housing is a human right. If you believe housing is a human right, then any economic activity which infringes upon that right is a form of violence. Because rights are not given and rights are not taken away. Rights are inherent, they are exercised, and they are only ever violated. And that is the origin of violence. So if we believe housing is a human right, then we also believe that the only qualification required is that you are a human being, and that any economic activity which that infringes upon that right is illegitimate. Because the economy, the stewardship and care of home, is the mechanism by which we take responsibility for collective rights. And so we must then say to ourselves, how are we organizing our economy and our communities to ensure that housing needs are met as a fundamental right? Those are the kinds of questions we want to ask ourselves, because when we organize ourselves in that way, where indigenous sovereignty, subsistence foodways, energy, access to energy, if we understand these things as fundamental rights infringed upon through a systematic and well-organized violence of the economy and the state, then we start to see ourselves not just trying to create alternatives, but organizing towards a truly revolutionary, a transforming, a turning over of the existing structures of power and domination. So, with the hands through the heartlands, if it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. The third principle I want to share is, if we are not prepared to govern, we are not prepared to win. Now, I just want to point out that I think sometimes when we're involved in social justice organizing, we're a little scared to actually have to do the hard, complicated, messy work of governing. To govern literally means to steer. To steer what? The economy, right? To govern is to steer. So I'm not talking about joining government. I'm talking about the daily practice of self-governance. I often jokingly point out, so I live in a collective living situation. We make our decisions by consensus. My kids, who are now teenagers, we had parent cooperative, democratically governed after-school programs. I used to train martial arts at a dojo that was cooperatively, democratically governed. Movement Generation is a democratically governed collective. We're a flat, horizontal organization where everybody is equal. And it's not because I'm cool. I wish I was cool. But it's not. I'm not doing it because I'm cool. I'm doing it because I'm trying to figure out every day what the daily practice of self-governance looks like, and at various scales. Right? What is energy democracy? It's not like the just transitions for energy is not about decarbonizing the energy. It's about democratizing the way we govern our relationship to energy. The decarbonization will come if we focus on our fundamental value of deeply democratic governance, right? Worker ownership, worker control, community self-governance, rematriation. These are processes of the deep practice of self-governance. And I also believe that we need to commandeer existing structures of governance and test their limits and, take them over and, not to use an industrial metaphor, but drive them really hard into things and crash them into stuff and, see what happens. I think that's kind of useful, right? If we can get our folks in positions of power, it's not about not being a part of existing systems of governance. It's about to what end. We should be getting our folks elected, not because we think those existing structures of governance are legitimate, but because that is a way to transform them. That is a strategy to use one form of governance to pick a bigger fight, to pick a bigger struggle, and to struggle with navigating the real contradictions it takes, right? This is this other big theme of navigating contradictions. Transition is very much, in part, just the process of navigating contradictions. I wish it was as simple as clicking my heels 3 times and waking up in the vision of the world we know we all want and deserve. Many of us, and certainly many folks here, live in that world in part every day all the time through traditional practices, through visionary alternatives, all of those things. But it's a much bigger process to transition whole communities and whole economies. And that takes navigating contradictions. And it takes 2 things to navigate contradictions well. It takes a finely tuned and well-maintained moral compass that you are constantly reflecting on to guide you. And it takes a community of practice, which is actually how you tune your moral compass in the first place. And of course, when I say moral compass, ideally we're looking up at the stars. But that's what it takes. It takes a community of practice that helps us be the people we want to be in the world. We don't see accountability as some kind of problem. It is the gift of people wanting to support me in being the person I want to be in the world. It is a gift. To be held accountable is a gift. So we need that community of practice to create the world we want and to practice self-governance. And the last principle is, if it is not soulful, it is not strategic. That our movement, our organizing must build on our cultures and traditions and ancestries. It must create the soul and the spirit and the feeling of the world that we are living into, that we remember. It doesn't matter how hard things get. It does not matter how bad things have been. We have always celebrated birth, honored death, we've always sung songs, shared stories, marked rites of passage, shared food, laughed. We have to have a culture, a spirit that can hold us through the organizing and the struggles and the challenges of our times. Because if everybody works really hard all day long building the world that we know we need, and then we go home and unwind by putting our feet up and watching Netflix, we're screwed. Right? I'm not making fun of any of us. I understand that we all do it. That's not the point. The point is we have to be creating the culture that will hold us. Because all of that other stuff is going away, right? That's all ephemeral. There's nothing permanent about the dominant extractive economy. It has to go away, right? That is the part of the transition that is inevitable, right? You cannot extract from a finite system faster than its capacity to regenerate and get away with it. You can't keep taking without giving back and expect the system not to collapse. Of course it will collapse. If you want to read a really, really good book about the subject, I suggest The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. Because if your economy is based on selling needs, and you chop down the truffula trees faster than they can grow back, your economy will collapse. And you may be able to insulate yourself from the impacts while the brown barb lutes flee and the swimmy swans get crummies in their tummies. But in the end, your economy will collapse, and you will just be some old, sad, wretched dude telling stories with regret. Ecology is permanent economy. Okay. So with those principles, what does that look like? What does that look like in the world? Well, it looks like so much of what we've heard about here, but I want to just give you a little view of some of the work that's happening in other places across Turtle Island, which is where the focus of most of my work is, although very much inspired by social movements all over the world. And these ideas, people don't have to call it just transition. Like, not everybody needs a just transition. Some people are desperately holding on to what is right in their communities. They don't need to transition to anything. They just need to keep a transition being forced upon them, right? But that's not true for my community. My community, I come from a family that was farmers growing food. That's not happening anymore in my community. Right? My village is basically a bus stop. So some of us need a transition of different qualities in different places in different ways. But here, there's some things I want to lift up. I want to, let's see. There's so many things. Obviously, there are some of the obvious ones when we've talked about before, and there's a lot of folks working here. I just want to really uplift the work around energy democracy, community and tribal ownership of energy, clean energy, community-controlled energy, the decentralization of energy systems, the drawing down of power and control of the communities. I think that's really important work. And it's happening everywhere, all over. Community ownership of energy through energy cooperatives, clean energy cooperatives. And in fact, one of the things that we've created is something called People's Solar Energy Fund, which is a cooperative of community community organizations doing community solar development, cooperative solar development. Because one of the barriers is finance. Because, it used to be that all land was part of the commons, meaning communities through consent and cooperation self-governed their relationship to land. And in fact, the name for most people give themselves is also the name for home, it's also the name for land, it's also the name for language. My daughter's name is Ila. Ila means earth, land, home. Most of us have had a consensual, cooperative relationship to each other in the lands upon which we interdepend. And then there's something happened, which was like the enclosure of land, right? The privatization of land, the infringement upon land. And so that idea that you could take something that was once everybody's, right? Private land is an infringement upon our pre-existing freedom of the commons, right? That's not an alternative to private ownership. Private ownership is the infringement upon our pre-existing freedom, right? And so the return of land through rematriation, through land back, through cooperative land stewardships, right? Where I am in Chin, Oakland, unceded Ohlone territories, we have the Segorite Land Trust, and we have something that we can all pay. If anybody else is here from Oakland, California, we have a Shumai land tax. We have a tax that we can pay into the Indigenous Women-led Land Trust as a recognition that we are guests upon this territory. And we can be in right relationship as guests, right? You don't leave dirty dishes in the sink. You don't use up all the toilet paper without replacing it. Like, there are good ways to be a guest. You clean up after yourself. You don't overstay your welcome. Right? So there's land and this whole process of decolonizing land, but there's this larger thing, which is the enclosure of land used to be the mother of all enclosures, or really the patriarch of all enclosures. But really now it's the enclosure of capital that facilitates the enclosure of everything else. The use of finance, is that a 7? Okay, great. Time to shut up. Now, one of the things that is used to control everybody's access to land is the control of capital through finance. And when I say capital, most people think money, but that's not what I mean. Capital is just a degraded form of clean air, healthy soil, fresh water, the labor of the living world, and our time and relationships. And it is that upon which all wealth is generated, and it is the enclosure of that wealth that then controls people's access to everything else, right? You have a need for housing, you can only get housing if you pay rent. That's the little mini key to the enclosure, when we all agreed it was a right. So how do we disrupt, in the same way that we want to disrupt the control of energy by corporations, the control of land through privatization, the control of our bodies through the prison industrial complex, the control of our identities through the imposition of everything from race to absurd binary notions of life's vast diversity of sexual and reproductive and kinship exuberance. We have to rebel against all these enclosures. And one enclosure that maintains them all is the enclosure of capital. And so I want to lift up the ways in which communities all over are creating commons of capital. We're creating these revolving loan funds in which communities control and own the wealth that they generate through their productive cooperative enterprises, and then create a commons of shared pool of capital that can be used to finance more and more community ownership, community wealth building. It is essentially a rebellion. It's not just a way of financing our just transition, but it's a way of rebelling against the existing structures of finance and the way they dominate communities. Because capital is just a tool, as Ed Whitfield says from the Fund for Democratic Communities and the Seed Commons. He points out that capital is an instrument and our relationships are sacred, but in the dominant economy, that's been inverted. Our relationships become instrumentalized and capital becomes sacred. Now we need to return capital to its rightful place as an instrument to create the world that we know we need, and to then restore that capital to what it has always been before, from its degraded form as money to clean air, healthy soil, fresh water, and the diversity of the living world. including all of our seeds, all of our stories, and all of our souls. I got like 2 minutes left, 5 minutes left. Okay, great. There's two other things I want to just mention. Okay, this is gonna, I'm trying to go fast here. Okay, I already talked about that, so cool, I saved some time. I want to talk about scale, because every time we talk about just transition, and we talk about all the amazing work that people are doing in their communities, people are like, well, what about scale? What about scale? And I think when people say, what about scale, they mean big. They think of scale as big. So there's two things I want to lift up. First, the scale of the problem does not dictate the scale of the solutions. The scale of the problem does not dictate the scale of the solutions. In fact, scale is part of the scale of the problem, right? You globalize the economy, you globalize the ecosystem, the relationships of home. You screw up the economy, the consequences become epic. The problem is not atmospheric concentrations of CO2. That is the emergent consequence of an entirely different problem, which is screwing up and exploiting ecosystems and communities everywhere, all over, all the time at once. The emergent consequence of that is disrupting the planet, the life support systems of the planet. The scale of the problem does not dictate the scale of the solutions. Now, the scale of our solutions have to add up to the scale of the problem. But they will happen everywhere at once. We will aggregate to scale. What if, as an organizer friend is fond of saying, what if we are winning and we don't just realize it? Because what I'm experiencing here is an enormous amount of incredible organizing that I see mirrored everywhere I go. I see it in the Gulf South, and we have our Gulf South friends here joining to both learn and share. I see it across Turtle Island. I see it with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. I see it with every community I work with. It's happening everywhere at once. The challenge is we have a hard time seeing it. But it's happening everywhere at once. And if you think of scale not as like just big, but like a scale, like a balance, right? Something can be really, really big and take up all the space on the scale, but not actually tip the balance, like a balloon, right? Which we can think of as like the big greens or the mainstream environmental groups or whoever's just like trying to take up all the space, but not really shifting the scales, right? And you can have something really, really small, like a marble, right? That might be one community's food sovereignty project, but that has the ability to shift the center of gravity in such a way that brings attention to and focuses and energy and insight on what's happening there, that creates the opportunity for it to propagate across communities. And all of the work that we're doing and all of the work people are doing all over the country is like, they're just like marbles. And if you're like a kid like me who played with marbles growing up, you don't just walk around with a big old bag of, with all your marbles in your shirt, right? You have a bag of marbles. And you drop that bag of marbles on the scale and suddenly everything shifts. And what that bag of marbles is the story that we are going to tell about our relationship to each other and to all of the other communities that we are organizing with. That's that idea that we can actually create connected tissue through stories and narrative and communication and shared strategy. That's why we have a just transition framework. It's not because we're trying to tell people what to do. We're definitely not trying to tell people what to do. We're trying to create a container that can hold all of what we are already doing and tell a bigger story. Because that is the thing that will shift what's possible. Okay, I'm going to end by just talking about hope. Because I don't actually peddle in the discourse of hope. I don't like hope. Um, that sounds awful, but mostly I think it's because the way people use the word hope is often because they don't feel any sense of agency, or I often feel like hope is a way of casting on responsibility for what we haven't done onto future generations, onto the next generations. Like, I have hope that the next generation will solve the problems. Like, that's just lazy. Come on, people. No, I don't mess around with hope. But I do look around every day for the reminders that we not only have the capacity, but we are exercising the capacity all the time, every day, to change everything about the world we are in, to be the world that we know we need, deserve, and want. And to me, I see that everywhere, and I see it all the time. And just to bring up a couple of a personal thing for me is, I feel like our movements have stopped being so siloed in where we talk about this thing or that thing, or I work on this and you work on that, but have actually increased our ability to have a complex view of how everything is connected. And for me, so I'm in my early 50s. I didn't come up as, and I'm a straight, monogamous, been married for over 20 years, parent of 2, from a traditional Indian family. Like, I didn't grow up, I didn't come up understanding the value and wisdom of queerness and the insight that the transgender community offers all of us as a movement around what it means to be a living rebellion against a system of enclosure of identity and of body. And that the contradictions of navigating transition are lived every day in our social movement. That is wisdom the energy democracy movement needs. That is wisdom that the transformative justice movement needs. That's wisdom that the food sovereignty movement needs. And until we accept that reality, that the wisdom of all of our experiences are vital, that's vital diversity to our collective well-being. If we have to move beyond just including individuals to recognizing the deep wisdom that comes with that experience into our movements. I see that happening in a way that I did not see for 20 years. And I see it happening now. And my kids, they take it for granted. They can't imagine not accepting the legitimacy of people's diverse experiences of life. That was new to me. I had to learn that. And I'm in some ways embarrassed, and in some ways I'm like, wow, we are in such a different place than we were, when I was coming up as an organizer. The fact that I see so many folks who are just like, yeah, no, I'm not really interested in just fighting against something, which we still need to do, obviously. We still need to stop bad things from happening. But I think the best way to stop bad things from happening is to confront them with the right answer, to create the solutions and force them to have to deal with that. Right? And I see that around us all the time. So I think that's probably shut the spot, right? Yeah, great. Okay, thank you all so much, and appreciate the time.